Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that comes up a lot, how to recover from the trauma of divorce. I'm joined by Charlotte Phipps, who is a therapist, a solution-focused hypnotherapist, and a sober coach. She helps her clients with a variety of complaints, whether it is anxiety, depression, insomnia, OCD, and she also helps those who self-medicate with alcohol and drugs. Charlotte, it's great to have you today. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you, Chloe. Lovely to see you.
Thanks for joining us. So I think we need to start from the beginning, right? We're talking about recovering from trauma. Maybe
Yeah.
we start with defining trauma. What is a trauma, and how do we know if someone's become traumatized?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I want to draw your attention to is trauma is not the event itself. And that's where a lot of people get quite confused. They believe that trauma is an event. It's something that happens to them, but that's not
Mhm.
actually the case. So the trauma is our perception and our thought processes and the neurochemistry that goes on within our brains when something happens to us.
Okay.
So if we take an example, let's imagine you walk outside of your front door and there's a gunman on your drive. I'm going to get my trusty brain out here just to help. You're going to go through this part of your brain, which is where we spend the majority of our day wandering around doing the things that we want to do, to this part of our brain, which is the primitive and original part of the brain. And it's normally referred to as our fight, flight, or freeze area of the brain. I'm sure you'll have heard that. Some people call it reptilian brain, monkey brain,
Yeah.
all of that. So you'll move from the intellectual part of your brain to the life-saving part of your brain.
Hmm.
Your heart rate will increase, your stomach will churn, and blood will be pushed out to your extremities so that you can get out of there. Okay, so
Oh,
and at that moment, your brain will do what we would probably call a screenshot in today's words. So it does like a screen grab of what's going on. So the sounds, the smells, what it sees, what it hears, how it feels, all of those things. And it stores it. All right.
yeah.
You get out of there, you run away. And a bit later on, you're thinking, oh my gosh, what happened? So during the events of that evening and subsequent evenings during REM sleep, we will process it.
Hmm.
Okay. So we will start to pattern match gunman, blue jumper, funny smell of kebabs, I don't know, whatever it is. But we will start to pattern match all of those things and we will recover from that traumatic event.
Yeah.
Now, if we relate that into divorce, it's not the moment the divorce is decided, the
Yeah.
moment you get your decree absolute. There's no particular moment, but it's all of our thought patterns surrounding it that cause what we would understand as trauma or post-traumatic stress.
Yeah. Okay. Now that makes a lot of sense. It's quite interesting actually that it's not. We always think trauma comes from an event that happened, something that was a dramatic event that would have caused that
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah.
So
And I mean,
that's
if
really
you think
interesting.
about it, yeah, I mean that it makes sense, doesn't it? If you think about it, we would think that it is my divorce or it is something that's failing my driving test or whatever it is a traumatic event. But if it were the case, everybody would react exactly the same to divorce. Some people are traumatized, some people are not.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, what makes the divorce such a typically traumatic event? Why do so many people struggle afterwards?
Well, it can be a combination of things. It can be how you arrived at the divorce. So let's imagine you've got two people that are arriving at divorce. Person A has been unhappily married for quite some time, but has been formulating a life sort of separate from their partner.
Hmm.
Got a secure job, feeling very stable, loving friends and family. Life is generally quite good to them, but they have an unhappy marriage. Then
Yeah,
you've got person B who is struggling maybe with their mental health at the time, as well as possibly their physical health. isn't really very in a stable environment,
Hmm.
financially not independent, or maybe a little bit lonely.
Yeah.
Of the two of those, person B is more likely to suffer with post-traumatic stress than
Yeah.
person A. So
Yeah.
it's a combination of events.
Yes. Okay. So it's not the divorce in itself, basically, is what you're saying. There's some pre-existing conditions that make
Yeah,
us more or less resilient to the experience.
absolutely,
And so what
absolutely.
would be the signs that someone's traumatized?
So a sign that someone was traumatized is they're not functioning in their day-to-day life. So it would be
Hmm.
very normal for somebody to cry when they're sad,
Hmm.
upset, post-divorce or during a divorce. That's completely natural. But if they can't get through their day, they can't perform basic tasks without breaking down in tears. They might also, if they're really suffering from post-traumatic stress, have very, very high levels of anxiety, maybe some
Yeah.
flashbacks, real problems sleeping, possibly distressing images,
Hmm.
sensations, things like that. It can also present physically as well, believe it or not. So we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
have people with fizzing hands and feet or something like that, headaches. The body can be really strange. It can show you in lots of different ways that you're not coping very well.
Yeah. That's very true. And people get stomach aches, insomnia, all of that. I think it's typical kind of
Yeah, yeah,
symptoms. And
yeah.
so what can they do then, looking forward to get over this trauma?
Well, I mean, if you're suffering from physical symptoms, the first thing we really always need to do is rule out that there's anything physiological going on as
Yeah.
well. So, yeah, maybe visit your GP in the first instance. But if it's just there's a lot of crying, there's a little bit of insomnia, that sort of thing, we're pretty sure it's going to be the divorce that's causing that.
Okay.
So what can you do? Prioritize sleep is the number one thing. Anytime I'm seeing a client for anything, I'll say, how's your sleep? One of the first questions I ask you, how's your sleep going? If they're
Interesting.
like, oh, Charlotte, I'm getting 8 hours a night, that makes me happy. Generally speaking, they don't say that, but so sleep, number one, prioritizing that, making sure that you're interacting with others well. We want you to
Hmm.
be interacting with your friends and family, not lonely.
Yeah.
Um, Having people that you can confide in, having people that you can talk through the situation, whether that be a therapist, coach, or just friends and family. Really, really important. Obviously, eating well and getting outside.
Yeah.
Not maybe so much in this at this time of year, but we can just go out for a walk, prioritizing that on a daily basis. That's all going to help us, and just giving ourselves a little bit of time and space and grace during this period, because it's
Hmm.
not going to be easy. And also small attainable goals to work towards, and the emphasis there is on small. Okay, you don't
Yes.
need to have completed everything. It can just be, I'm going to pick a colour for my lounge walls.
Yeah.
That.
No, you're right. That's a big part of it is actually demystifying the recovery because it seems like a mountain to overcome. And just taking those baby steps that give you that satisfaction of having achieved an objective. And actually trying to reconnect with who you are, like who you were, before the marriage, but also maybe during it. But who do you really want to be? What are your hobbies? Sometimes people give up hobbies in the context of a marriage. So those
Absolutely,
kind of things are really
absolutely. And
important.
some ladies, will give it up when they have children. It might have coincided with the marriage, but we very often can lose sight of who we are, who we were.
Hmm.
Or also maybe some of those hobbies don't interest us anymore, but it's just having something outside that we, not necessarily outside, but outside of a relationship or outside of being a parent that we enjoy. Doesn't really
Yeah,
matter what it is,
yeah,
that we can
I agree.
focus on and prioritize.
And in your experience, does it take a long time for people to get over trauma? I guess it depends on how bad the trauma is.
Yeah. You're right. It depends how bad the trauma is, how long they've been suffering from the trauma or
Hmm.
traumatic stresses, and also whether they have what we would call secondary gains, because a lot of clients, particularly ones who suffered from it for quite some time,
Yeah.
um, they might have what we call a secondary gain. So there is an advantage to their trauma. Let's say they
Oh.
get quite a lot of attention,
Hmm.
or the divorce is put on pause while they're getting through it. Something
Yeah.
like that. That's what we would call a secondary gain. So we need to establish, first of all, are there any positives to this trauma
Yeah.
or the symptoms of the trauma? And a therapist would work through that quite gently with you. We're not going to say, is there a benefit straight away? But what we're really looking for is just, if we're not recovering, why are we not recovering? But we'll
Yeah.
take gradual steps towards that.
Okay. And is there anything that friends and family can do? You mentioned the importance of friends and family and other support during that time.
Yeah.
For untrained
Here's more.
professionals, what can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. You certainly don't have to be a professional to be able to help a loved one or a friend through divorce. So number one, don't just talk about the divorce. Okay.
Yes.
Doesn't make it a taboo subject, but there needs to be other conversations. All right. Maybe reminding your buddy who they are, what their talents are, what their skills are. Do you remember that lovely flapjack you made me? When are you going to make some more? Something like that, you know?
Yeah.
Do you remember that time when we went to? How about we have a night out? Doing small things that you can look forward to together is
Yeah.
another wonderful thing that you can do. Planning a night out together, or doing something new, encouraging that person, even by asking them as a favor, would you mind coming with me, rather than do you need me to take you out? That sort of
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
giving them something other than the divorce to focus on.
Yeah.
Great help. Also, if they're really in the early stages and they're really struggling, you can offer them a helping hand, just like we do when our girlfriends maybe have a baby. We might take round something to eat, or offer to take the baby for a walk while they can catch up on a couple of hours sleep. Anything like that in the early stages is really, really beneficial.
Yeah.
Okay. And obviously, if you're noticing that your friend or family member really isn't moving on, gently suggesting to them there are people that can help.
Yeah. I think that's really important, recognizing the limits as a friend of what you can provide, and directing someone towards the right person. And you say, as you say, it's a bit delicate. You have to do it carefully,
Yeah.
but it is the right thing to do. And when we were preparing for this podcast, I remember you saying that when someone repeats the same story over and over and over again, that reinforces the trauma. And I think that's really interesting, because in any divorce, everybody creates their own narrative. You need to explain it to yourself, right? And people repeat it to themselves until it becomes their truth.
Yeah.
So what can friends do in that sense when they notice someone's kind of entrenched in their narrative, to help them break that cycle and move away from the trauma?
Well, there's a lovely, really, one of the very first things that I explain when I've got my brain out and I'm working with my clients is, our brains don't know the difference between reality and imagination. So
Hmm.
let's imagine every day you replay the scenario of your wife leaving you.
Hmm.
You have been left 50 times, not
True.
once, 50
Yeah.
times. Okay.
Yeah.
So, of course, we're going to replay it. It's how we make sense of it. But our brain will recover on its own with no intervention from us. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So the wonderful thing is, so if we find ourselves caught in a bit of a loop or an automatic negative thought, and we're trying to pick it apart day after day for the look that they gave us, or the words that they used, what did they mean by that? Trying to continuously make sense of it.
Yeah.
Okay. What we're actually doing is reliving the event. So theoretically, we've had 50 divorces. So that's going to actually increase the traumatic response.
Yeah.
So it's very important that we try to distract ourselves from that. If we need an answer to something, it's best we ask.
Yeah.
But there's something that we're not going to get an answer to. So let's say we're not really going to get to the bottom of it at that moment, what's really behind it. The best thing that we can do is focus our attention on what we're doing in that moment.
Yeah.
Really be present in that moment, because that's actually going to reduce the symptoms of stress, and it's not going to be going into our stress bucket. So we always have to remember your brain doesn't know the difference between reality and imagination. So you can create your own picture in your mind
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
make it true. So you can actually soften the edges of it. I was just too fabulous for them. That's what it is. Now I know that's a bit, I'm joking a little bit with
It's
you,
a nice way to look at it.
but yes, you can actually tell yourself over and over and over again, and that's kind of where the expression "fake it till you make it" comes from. If we just keep telling ourselves we're too fabulous, eventually we're going to start believing it. And
Yeah.
especially if we do that in hypnosis or in meditation, that's going to be even better. So just take it easy on yourself and try not to get stuck in that loop.
Yeah.
Focus your attention on something else if you
Yeah.
can.
I agree. I think that the looking backwards is something I see a lot, with especially people who are left, but even those who make the decision to leave, trying to understand how it came to be, and was it because of this fight we had 5 years ago, and they go
Yeah.
back and back and back, and that's not really helpful. They can't change what happened anyway. They're in their current situation. So looking forward is definitely
Mm.
a much
There's a
more
lovely
productive approach.
there's a lovely metaphor that I use. I think with a few of my clients that struggle with that a bit, and I always say to them that the windscreen is bigger than the rear view mirror for a reason.
I love that. That's very true.
Yeah, it is. We do need to
Yeah.
look forward. We can only get so much information from looking back, and maybe we can learn. We do
Yeah.
learn from our
Yeah.
past. So I'm not saying you shouldn't look back at all, but it's a glance in the rearview mirror.
Yes. Yes, and it's something that I see as well a lot in people who are in their post-divorce phase, and really struggling to recover.
Yeah,
Is really this focus on trying not to repeat the mistakes from the past, which is great because you are taking the positive out of the experience to avoid it happening again. But dwelling too much could be also detrimental, according to what you're saying.
yeah.
So it's about finding the right balance there.
Yes, and of course we'd like to not repeat our mistakes. Nobody wants to fall back into the hole that they've just avoided. But I think yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's that's then actually solution focus. Well, I've learned this, and like this is what I'm
Yeah.
going to do going forward. So that's really, really positive. What would you say is one of the running threads with the clients that you work with when it comes to
Yeah.
divorce and the stories that are coming through?
That is definitely a big one. People are take with them this fear that they perceive their marriage as a failure, and so they take that fear of failure along with them in their next relationship, and actually becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's definitely a big one. And then I think just in general, people just feeling afraid of loving again, or of being lovable again,
Oh,
and just
yeah.
that sense that if it didn't work, is it something that has to do with me that's going to make me incapable of happiness and of the kind of relationship I want to have? So I think those are two common concerns that people take with them,
Yeah.
and that are hard to get over, but that with time, as they take those small steps towards rediscovering who they are, rebuilding their social circles according to their new life, and just getting back on their feet emotionally.
Yeah.
They get there, but those are definitely some of the big concerns that I hear.
And what do you do to help them with that? How do you guide them if they're saying these things to you?
Yeah, I think looking at all the good things about themselves, doing lists about what are all your qualities. What do you think your ex fell in love with? That forces them to look at themselves through that lens and to
Yeah,
acknowledge the skills and the qualities that they have. And so
yeah,
realizing that those qualities have not disappeared because that relationship ended, and that they take those along with them because that's who they are. And so
yeah.
that helps build those building blocks to regain that self-confidence that they usually have to work on.
Wonderful. Yeah, fantastic. That sounds brilliant. Oh, good.
So I wanted to ask you a last question, Charlotte. What would be your top tip for those who are struggling to recover from their divorce?
My top tip, just the one. I always struggle with
You can give me a few.
top tip, just prioritize your physical health. Okay.
Okay.
We don't realize our mental health is directly linked to our physical health. So make sure you're sleeping, make sure you're eating, make sure you're drinking water, not
Yes.
copious amounts of wine, maybe, the odd glass of wine here or there, but to make sure that you're not self-medicating with alcohol, and prioritize getting out and we're social creatures. We need to be with our friends and family. You don't need to be
Yeah.
in a club if you don't want to be, but you can just be amongst people. When we're lonely, we're going to struggle even more. So that's
Yeah.
really, really important. So I'm sorry I've given you 5 or 6 rather than one, but
They
they're
all
all
fit into the
really,
physical health piece.
yes, they do. Thank you.
And I'd probably add to that just being kind to yourself. Don't you think it's one of the things that
Yeah.
people are so harsh on themselves? They think that they can recover overnight and they compare themselves to others who have a different story and who may have felt differently at the end of their own divorce. Just be patient, be kind,
And we
be
would
your own best
never
friend.
speak to our best friend like that, would we? If we would never
Absolutely.
say to our best friend, "Well, just get over it already." We've got to be kind to ourselves. So treat
Yeah.
yourself like your best friend. Yeah.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Great. Well, hopefully everybody will find those tips helpful. And it's been really helpful understanding from you, from a technical perspective, how trauma is created and some of the tips that people can put in place. And I'll keep in mind hypnosis as a solution here. It sounds like a really good
Really, really
approach.
good. Okay, lovely to
Wonderful.
talk
Thank you
to
so
you.
much, Charlotte.